Hey guys, Mike here. So today's cult classic review is 1985's Brazil, starring Jonathan Pryce as Sam Lowry. In Brazil, a bureaucrat in a dystopian society is on the run from the authorities as he chases down the woman of his dreams. And so we have Brazil. So guys, this is a movie in the series that before watching and reviewing it today, I had not seen it before, nor had I ever heard of this one. Though it was kind of odd that I'd never heard of this movie before, but as soon as I saw that it was on the cult classic poster, nearly every YouTuber who I watch about movies had mentioned this film. So whether it was the fact that I had heard of this one before and just kind of ignored it because I didn't know what it was, or whether it was just, you know, a coincidence, but that doesn't really matter. But then when I heard people talking about this one, I did a little bit of research on it, and I saw that there were 3 versions of this film. Love Conquers All, the theatrical cut, and the director's cut. But beyond that point, I didn't really do much research into what makes each individual version different or better than the other, because I feel that would have stepped into spoiler territory, and I didn't really want to know anything about this film going into it. So my thought process was that I'm going to watch the longest version, the director's cut, so I can get the most out of this film. So like I said, didn't do any other research besides that, I just went for the longest version so I could get the most out of it. So in this review, I'll be just talking about the director's cut of the film. Now people probably say that the other versions of the film are probably better than the director's cut, and I should probably go back and watch those ones to get the fullest experience out of Brazil. But honestly, I have no intention of going back and watching any other version of this film, because, slight spoiler for the review, I didn't really enjoy this film all that much, but I will be going into more detail as to why that is. So again, this review is going on the director's cut. So, what do I think of Brazil? Well, I gotta say, I loved the setup for this film. I thought it was brilliant how this whole series of chaotic events begins with the smallest of most minute details. The fact that a fly falls on a typewriter and changes one singular letter, and from there a whole series of events ensues. I just found it really interesting, this whole bureaucratic dystopian society that they have, where everything's buried under miles of paperwork and hardly anything seems to get done, because no one really knows how their own system works. Sure, the people at the top know how it works, but honestly, they probably don't really know either. And probably other people have had this thought as well, but I just thought it was something interesting that I noticed in the movie. Because the scene where Robert De Niro comes in and fixes Jonathan Pryce's character's apartment, you know, sorting out the heat and everything like that, he goes up to the wall and removes a panel, and underneath that panel is a whole series of convoluted wires. And I thought this was an interesting metaphor for how their society works. On the surface, it looks really straightforward and everything makes sense. But then, when you go beneath the surface and see how it all really works, it's all really convoluted and you have to really know what you're doing to kind of navigate this system. Again, probably someone else has thought that, I just thought it was something interesting. The performances were fairly decent in this film as well. No one is actively bad in this movie, but I would have to say that no one really stood out to me. But having said that, the only people who really stood out were the actors who I'd known previously going into this one, like Michael Palin, Jonathan Pryce, Robert De Niro, Ian Holmes, all those kind of ones. But not really for their performance in this one, just for their recognisability. And I did think Brazil was setting up for a fairly interesting plot. It had all the pieces ready to get me really invested and wonder what's going to happen next. But unfortunately, I found it didn't really do anything interesting with them. Like, my biggest one is the whole love story behind this film. It's definitely the weakest and nonsensical part of the whole film. Honestly, I can get behind the whole fact of this guy sees this woman in his dreams and actively pursues her because he kind of wants to know why it's happening and because he wants to see if he actually is in love with this woman. That's fair enough. And I can see a bit why he falls in love with her, because he's kind of basically told by the movie itself that he has to. But for her character, the only reason that she seems to fall in love with her is because the movie says that she has to. Because when he's around her, he shows no attractive qualities, they don't seem to share any of the same opinions, and he just doesn't really come off as someone that she would be interested in, because everything he does to her or around her, he just looks like an absolute psychopath. And why she spends any time around him is just beyond me. And it's never really explained why these dreams are happening or why these two are linked. It's just basically the movie tells them that they have to be together, and they just end up together. Great. And the whole mystery element of the film as well never really gets explored to a satisfying degree either, because Jonathan Pryce's character just treats it as a secondary objective, which I understand why he's doing it, but beyond that, it never really becomes anything much. There's this whole massive cover-up, which is interesting, but honestly, it was kind of barely explored. And honestly, he just seems massively disinterested in the whole conspiracy, and he just used it as a means to an end to get to the woman who's in his dreams. But again, going into something else that I did actually really like about Brazil, the set design and the world building. I love this whole idea of tubes running through the entire city, or probably even the whole planet. But that's something they, again, don't really explain. It's just kind of one of these things that people have just come to accept. Now I know they don't have to explain absolutely everything in a film, and some things can just be left up to your imagination, but I would have loved at least one scene where someone actively uses the tubes or, like, says something about them. But really the only kind of acknowledgement they get is saying, "Oh, are your tubes out of date? Get some brand new tubes." At the end of the day, there just seem to be pointless capitalism, which is fun and all, it really works for this story, but maybe just a little bit more of an explanation. And I do like how Brazil really kind of finds a nice balance between being super serious and being extremely wacky as well. And for the longest time, it manages to balance these two excellently. But then towards the end, the film just keeps getting more and more ridiculous. And I'm just thinking, what is going on in this film? And then when I thought the film was ending, I just thought, wow, what a stupid and ridiculous ending. But then literally the last scene of the movie ultimately saved the ending for me. And as a whole, I did kind of like this ending, because I do like slightly unexpected, bleak endings. It just adds a bit more of unpredictability and just a little bit more originality as well. And even though I did think that the dream sequences and the whole love story, like I've said, were kind of a bit pointless to the whole story, that didn't stop them from being really creative and really interesting to explore. It's just like I've said, they didn't really end anywhere satisfying for me, but still the creativeness was appreciated. And honestly, if they spent the whole film dealing with these dream sequences and kind of pushed the story forward using them, that would have been really good. So guys, would I consider Brazil a personal cult classic, and would I recommend that you guys should see it? I can see why so many people consider this movie a cult classic. It definitely has loads going for it. While I didn't find the love story or the mystery element to Brazil all that entertaining or interesting, I can see why so many other people would. Because to be honest, even though I do think that they are the weakest parts of the film, it definitely isn't terrible, and I can see why so many people would get loads of enjoyment out of this. The world building, the set design are excellent in this film, and the constant tonal shift and balance is definitely, again, another one of Brazil's strongest points. But you're probably thinking I might get a lot more enjoyment out of this film had I watched different versions of Brazil. But to be honest, I have no interest in going back and watching this film again. Because while I do think Brazil has a lot of strong points, its weaker points definitely do hold it back from me wanting to watch it again. So, as for me considering this one a personal cult classic, I would not consider it one. Because, like I say, the negatives definitely do outweigh the positives. But as for whether or not you guys should see it, I wouldn't say to actively avoid this film, because it is definitely a good film. It's just, for me personally, I didn't get all that much enjoyment out of it, so I wouldn't give my personal seal of approval on this one. But I mean, if you're interested in checking out what this film has to offer, then by all means give it a watch, because at the end of the day, this is not a bad film. It's just, I didn't really like it all that much. Okay guys, that's my cult classic review of Brazil. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Whatever you think, drop it in the comments below. Until next time, I've been Michael. See ya.